Hey guys, what's up? In this video, I'm going to be discussing the truth about psychiatrists and psychologists and psychology. Now, first off, I went to school and I majored in psychology. In university, psychology was my major. And I graduated with a degree in psychology. So I think that qualifies me to comment on what I'm about to comment on, because I've actually studied psychology as a degree. Okay, first off, psychology is not a science. Psychology is based on a bunch of theories, and these theories are just, they're voted upon by a big group of psychologists to see whether they make sense or not. They can't be proven. These theories can't be proven. It's a bunch of speculation, and quite frankly, I believe they're making up a bunch of these theories to suit certain political agendas. You could go to 10 different psychologists and make a complaint about something, and you'll get 10 different diagnoses. That's not scientific. That's those people, those psychologists, giving you an opinion. It's not based on science. They're just like, oh, maybe you got this, maybe you got that. They're just guessing. They're making guesses and giving you an opinion on what you're complaining about. And that's not science, and that's not a fact. There's a difference between facts and opinions. Facts are something you can actually prove. Opinions, they can be questionable. In this video, I'm going to insert a couple articles from the internet talking about how psychology is not a science. Okay, guys, here are some things that I found on the internet. A couple of articles discussing how psychology is not a science. Here it is. Okay, guys, this is from the website madeinamerica.com. It's entitled, Why Psychology is Not Viewed as a Science. Researcher explores why the public, scientists, and policymakers question the scientific status of psychology. Psychology has lost the trust of the general public, other scientists, and policymakers. An article published in American Psychologist reviewed the issues within the field that has marred its reputation. The author suggests that the field needs a complete cultural change if it wants to be called a science. The article, written by Christopher Ferguson of Stetson University, suggests that it is external problems and internal issues within the discipline that have marred its credibility. These include the replication crisis and psychology's defensiveness towards it, its outdated, simplistic, and mechanistic understandings of people, and its biased use of sweeping, politicized statements. Psychology has encountered numerous attacks on its reputation. It cannot replicate its prominent findings. There are accusations of widespread corruption. Evidence-based treatments are under scrutiny, and research suggests material help might be more important than psychological services. Basically, you can help a person more by giving them money than by sending them to therapy. Policymakers, the general public, and other scientists often do not consider psychology to be a science. Ferguson writes that these wounds to the field's reputation are self-inflicted, and that psychological science, both theoretically and methodologically, is not ready for prime time. He divides the internal problems plaguing psychology into three groups: methodological issues, theoretical issues, and the marketing of psychology. Methodological issues. Ferguson raises an important point, that while non-replication of studies happens in other sciences, it was psychology's resistance to the concept of replication itself that was egregious. Replication, where different researchers carry out the same studies to see if they get the same results, is often called the backbone of science. Psychologists have been resistant, with some saying that studies that find failed replication should not be published. Psychological journals also often refuse to publish replication research. Thus, this aversion to replication is a cultural problem in psychology. Psychology has also demonstrated a cultural aversion to publishing null results. Null results provide evidence that no difference existed between the control and the experimental group. Example, one given the placebo, while another a new drug/therapy. Ferguson notes that while null results are an important part of science, Both journals and authors are known to either suppress or ignore these results. Reasons to suppress null results include authors' desire to get published or bias favoring their chosen theories. Consequently, studies that find positive results get overreported, creating a biased view of the efficacy of the treatment. Questionable researcher practices were indicated even in the psychology papers of highly reputable scientific journals like Science. An example of QRPs is halting data collection when the study begins to produce desired results and choosing the type of analysis that produces significance, etc. Other researchers have pointed to similar problems, such as spinning abstracts. The absence of transparency is another problem, as researchers are not required to share their data for review and are often hostile when asked for raw data. Ferguson writes that to fix these issues, psychology must lose its aversion to null results, reduce its defensiveness towards falsified results, and journals should acquire data sets to be submitted for the editors to review. Theoretical issues. Ferguson notes that psychology often makes simplistic assumptions about people that portray them as mechanistic. He gives the example of what he calls the hammer hypothesis. A social learning theory states that people's behavior is decided by what they observe. However, people do not automatically do what they see. Numerous factors are involved in deciding who we model and how we choose to model behaviors. Psychology has overemphasized the power and automatic nature of modeling, whereas people themselves are far more complex and agentic. Another problem is theoretical rigidity, as researchers try to protect their favorite theories at the cost of scientific rigor. Their own reputation and ego are often attached to theoretical perspectives and can guide experimentation, leading to confirmation bias and scientific inbreeding. Ferguson notes that this especially holds for theories with advocacy goals that people might cherish in the face of criticism of that theory. Additionally, Ferguson argues that psychology often straddles the line between science and advocacy, which have diametrically opposing goals. While science is supposed to be objective, truth-oriented, and neutral, advocacy, by its nature, advocates for something, and thus has a predetermined goal that is not neutral. Since research funding is often dependent on advocacy groups, scientific rigor is compromised, as researchers are prone to finding results that bolster their advocacy goals. Ferguson suggests to tackle these problems, psychology should become data-driven rather than theory-driven, and there should be an active effort to search out data that may be problematic for a theory in development. Additionally, researchers should shy away from funding obtained by advocacy groups to avoid experimenter bias. Any input provided to advocacy groups or policymakers should be simply the presentation of the data without interpretations. Ferguson notes that human behavior is complex and nuanced and not given to easy assessment in laboratory settings. Thus, while psychology should remain close to its data, it must also understand that the data we have may not always fully capture the human condition. Marketing of psychology. Ferguson further writes that psychologists and organizations such as the APA heavily indulge in marketing psychology by issuing policy statements with moral or political leanings, but are not based on empirical evidence. Ferguson writes that the numerous policy statements issued by the APA task forces are often produced in echo chambers. If an APA statement is not backed by empirical evidence, it reveals that psychology's claim to be a science is hollow. By releasing repeated policy statements and having advocacy goals, psychologists often engage in citation bias. They selectively choose research that supports their statements. For example, APA's policy statements on media and video games causes aggression has been criticized for ignoring studies that find otherwise. He writes, "It is not my position that these opinions by the APA are wrong, but rather that the APA simply expresses what are indeed opinions too often." Yeah, and there's a difference between an opinion and a fact. Next, Ferguson chastises psychology for statistical sleight of hand by pretending that small effect sizes, which are prevalent in most psychological research, in fact mean big and important differences. He also claims that psychology tends towards juvenoia, the inclination to find that today's youth are psychologically worse than previous generations, While good for securing grant funding, this is again based on biased and precarious evidence. Lastly, Ferguson notes that incessant press releases that announce new studies lead to researchers misreporting their data. While new research gets the spotlight, when it is debunked, the retractions and criticisms do not receive the same amount of press, ensuring the general public ends up misinformed. Other times, it's just embarrassing. Ferguson ends by noting that what is required for psychology to be taken seriously as a science is for it to act as a science. This involves a change in the larger culture of the discipline, beginning with graduate students' training. Now, I have a degree in psychology. I majored in psychology in university, and I graduated, and I have a psychology degree. And in one of my classes, I was taking a social psychology class. Even the professor himself, he admitted that psychology is not a science. It's based on a bunch of made-up theories that can't be proven. And also, psychology is used for psychological political abuse. It's used against dissidents to try to discredit corruption that's being exposed. And also, a lot of people, psychology has come down to discrediting people simply by name-calling. Instead of discrediting someone's argument, they simply name-call them by saying, "Oh, you're schizo, take your meds." That's name-calling. That's not discrediting somebody's argument. And it's not scientific. It's simply a dummy's way of trying to discredit you by calling you names. And since you can't discredit the proof that's being shown to you, you simply call the person names, which is just a meaningless thing to do. It doesn't mean anything. Calling someone a schizo, it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean their argument's wrong. It just means that you can't refute the facts. So you just result in name-calling because you have no facts. And a lot of people out there are, they're armchair psychologists. They're amateur psychologists, and they just like calling people names as a part of their argument, because they actually don't have an argument. They just like name-calling in order to discredit somebody. And name-calling is not an argument. It's not a legitimate way of debating. It's something that con artists do. Somebody who's trying to hide the truth, they'll attack the person instead of the person's message, and they'll attack the person by name calling. Now, here's another write-up from the website scienceleadership.org, and this is from the Science Leadership Academy at Center City. It says, "Psychology is not a science. Psychology is not a science, and that's a personal bias, and I will openly admit that I am fully aware of that fact that it is a bias. While it's technically considered a soft science, I would like to dismiss it as a science altogether. And why would I like to dismiss this idea? Well, first and foremost, no psychology experiment is reproducible. And it doesn't exactly have clear terminology either. What constitutes happiness? What is anxiety? What is insanity? And what makes us crazy? Within the parameters of the physics community, if you say velocity, everyone knows that. Physicists have a very specific way to measure velocity. There is no scale to measure things in psychology. Therapists always ask, "How are you feeling today out of 10? But it's an arbitrary scale. What exactly is a 3? There is no strict defined sense that makes psychology a unified field. Psychology's purpose is to study the human mind and functions by studying given behaviors within an individual. But everyone can come to their own conclusion, and they could all be right." My psychology bias was probably started when I was fairly young. I was dragged to the school counselor and then therapist and psychiatrist and whatever else. And everyone said a different thing. They saw things in a different way. What one doctor said was a good idea, another disagreed with, and they had something else to say. I've always wanted to be a scientist, so I always saw things from the perspective of an astronomer or an engineer. The terms with psychology are vague and unquantifiable. Terms within other scientific fields are quantifiable. Speed is quantifiable. How many watts a light bulb puts out is quantifiable. Temperature is quantifiable. But how depressed someone isn't quantifiable. And that's the thing. All diagnosis given by a psychologist can't be proven like a doctor's can. We can prove that someone has cancer or someone has pneumonia, but we can't justify the idea that someone has generalized anxiety disorder because they're nervous about presenting in school and meeting new people. Most people are nervous about that. Nervousness is a biological result that has helped keep us out of dangerous situations and helped us stay alive. Fight or flight reaction is what has allowed the continuation of the human race. We still need to have the fight or flight reaction to be able to survive. It heightens our reaction time so we can get out of dangerous situations. Psychology has also failed to reproduce experiments with controlled variables. The thing about experiments within this field is that they can monitor brain waves and brain chemistry, but everyone is going to react in a different way because human beings appear to be arbitrary. This is also considered to be neurology because outside factors, genetics, pre-existing medical conditions, and current conditions can greatly outcome the results they get. The human mind and the human brain are far too complex for us to even begin to fathom at this point in our existence. One of the arguments for psychology is that they can use it for forensics and to track people like serial killers and such, because they look at their past actions and they try and assume what the future actions of this person will be. I can predict a pattern, and people can be arbitrary, so it's not exactly accurate. There's nothing measurable or definable about the way that they track people. Sure, they can look at who the victim is and how they died or their murderer's background, and that might help them, but there's nothing to prove. There's nothing to back them up in what they think. Science, by definition, is a human attempt to view the world in an analytical attempt, a way to find out how nature works. It's a systematic attempt to find out what's going on through controlled experimentation and observation. Psychology isn't any of that. Psychology is an attempt to see how the human mind works, which is impossible. And it's not through any controlled experimentation. Sure, we can see how people react to things, but it's not controlled in the least. Valid experiments are reproducible and have very clear controls. Psychology boasts none of those. It's all based upon how people say they feel and how they think, and people can lie. It's not accurate. There really is no objective to psychology. They want to understand the human mind, but everyone is different, so they will never be able to produce a solid theory or conclusion. We can all agree that there are 4 states of matter: liquid, solid, gas, and plasma. We have reached that conclusion, and we purposely choose to go and find that conclusion. The purpose of astronomy, to understand the world beyond our world, and to look for life beyond ours. The purpose of psychology is to understand and control the human behavior, which is impossible. We can't control what people are going to do, and we aren't always going to understand why people do things. There isn't always a reason as to why we do the things we do. It would be almost near impossible to have a full unification in psychology. Depression and PTSD and anxiety all affect people in different ways. And then because it affects everyone in a different way, there's different ways to deal with it or treat it. And then there's no way to prove that someone has something. Doctors can see the different chemicals in the brain or the different ways that brainwaves function, but that can also be changed with other variables. One of the opposing solutions to psychological issues is psychiatry, which is the study of psychology under the effect of medication, which is a chemical solution to a mental problem, because most psychological issues are believed to be caused by chemical imbalances, i.e. depression is a lack of serotonin. So to conclude my argument, I still don't think that psychology is a science. I don't think there is a fair justification and reasoning to make it provable and to make it scientific. As an aspiring scientist, I think that the hard scientists are the only valid sciences. So here it says there's no way to prove that somebody has something. It's sort of like a lot of these people, they like to throw around names as insults, like schizo, take your medication, schizo. And there's no way to prove what that even means or if the person is a so-called schizo. So people really, they don't know what the fuck they're talking about when it comes to psychology. They're pulling shit out of their ass, and they're just, it's come down to name-calling psychology, a lot of it. Yeah, a lot of psychology has come down to name-calling. And these people who try to pretend they're psychologists, they don't know what they're talking about. And they're just talking out of their ass. They're making shit up. And it's really just a way to call people names and to try to insult them. Like saying, you're a schizo. It's really just name-calling in an attempt at insulting someone, because there's no way to prove if somebody is a schizo. How do you prove if someone's a schizo, and what does a schizo even mean? People just, they make shit up, and they're full of shit. And psychology is rife with fraud. A lot of these doctors and psychiatrists and psychologists, they're completely full of shit, and they don't know what they're talking about. They're making up theories, and they're trying to apply them to people when there's no scientific way to see whether it's true or not. They're just making things up, and applying labels to people, and it's completely it's fraudulent. A lot of these doctors, they don't know what they're talking about, and they're labeling people with psychological terms, and they don't even know what those terms actually mean, and they don't even know if that person actually has it. It's just their opinion, and they could have biased opinions, or there's no way to scientifically prove what they're saying. They're just giving off some unscientific opinion based on nothing. Yeah, so psychology, it's not dependable. You can't rely on it because it's made up of opinions. It's not scientific. It's based on opinions and theories. Like, if I go into a psychologist office, they don't know the first thing about me. I have to tell them. And so I could be lying, or I could just be wrong about myself. Maybe I don't understand myself totally, and I say these things to the psychologist, and then they're basing their whole description of me on what I say, and what I say may be incorrect. So yeah, psychology is not a science. It's masquerading as a science. And we're back. So what do you guys think about what I just read? A lot of people who are political dissidents, they're being accused of being schizophrenic or crazy or delusional. First off, you can't prove any of that stuff. It's just name calling. A lot of these armchair psychologists, these wannabe fucking Dr. Freuds, they actually don't know what they're talking about, and they don't have an argument. So what they do, they just name call. They say you're crazy, or you're a schizo. And the reason they do that is because they can't disprove what you're saying. So they just try and call you names to discredit what you're saying. It's called an ad hominem attack. Instead of attacking the argument, you attack the person, and you just call them names. It's the tactic of a con artist. And psychology is full of con artists. People who are political dissidents now are being attacked by these Freemasons in the government. Every single one of them, they're being called crazy and schizophrenic and delusional. And the reason they're being called this is because these people who are committing these crimes, they don't want you to think they're actually happening. They want you to think, oh, they're imagining it. They're imagining these things happening, right? Like all these thousands of fucking people complaining about the exact same thing. Oh, they're just imagining it's happening. Like, so instead of like looking into the claims and seeing if they're true, they're just name calling people because it's an actual tactic to cover up their fucking crimes. The intelligence agencies call it a cover story. Basically, it's an excuse for what you're seeing. Oh, all these people are complaining about being attacked by the government? Oh, they're crazy. No, that's the excuse they're saying. It's a way to try to dismiss the complaints. So these ad hominem attacks, this name calling, it's not a valid argument. Name calling is a loser's way of trying to win an argument because they actually don't have any facts. You know, when you're having a discussion and you're talking about something, you're supposed to bring the facts. When you see somebody start name calling and they don't have any facts, you know they've lost the argument and they simply don't know what they're talking about. So they start calling people names out of frustration because they're losing the debate. You know, an old favorite tactic of communists is to throw political dissidents in mental institutions. They did that in the Soviet Union. And what's going on with targeted individuals? It's exactly what went on in the Soviet Union and East Germany under communism. It's COINTELPRO tactics. When they have political dissidents, this is the playbook they use to target them. They do all this stuff, all this gang stalking and breaking into people's houses and gaslighting them. And then they pull the old favorite trick of the communists. They say the person's crazy or mentally ill, and they throw them in a mental hospital. Political dissidents, they get thrown in mental hospitals by these people using these communist tactics. And you know, the vast majority of the public are not too intelligent, man. If you look at an IQ graph, you know, it's like a bell curve. Go read the book, The Bell Curve. If you look at an IQ graph, you'll see it, you know, it goes up like this and then down. And in the middle is the average IQ. The average IQ of white people on a bell curve is 100. That's the average IQ. That means 50% of white people have an IQ below 100, and 50% of people have an IQ above 100. So that means 50% of white people have an IQ lower than 100, the average. That means, you know, there are a lot of low IQ people out there, white people. And I'm only talking about my own race. I'm not even going to discuss any other races. I wouldn't even bother. I don't care what their IQs are. But I'll just discuss my own race, just for an example. So 50% of white people have an IQ below 100. It is easy to fool and bamboozle these people, man, because they just don't have a great power of thought. Now, half of white people have an IQ above 100. Now, my IQ, I've had my IQ tested, and my IQ is 134. Okay, so I have a high IQ. I don't have the highest IQ in the world, but it's in the top 5% for my race. And my IQ is 2 standard deviations above the norm, which is an IQ of 100. So you could say I'm pretty intelligent. If you read the book, The Bell Curve, they talk about how head size and brain size is associated with IQ and intelligence. And I have a pretty big head, which means I have a pretty big brain and a pretty big brain case. Sorry, I don't mean to brag about my intelligence. That just sounds off-putting, I know. But I'm just letting you know my stats, okay? I'm letting you know what kind of brain I'm working with, just so you know. So yeah, a lot of targeted individuals, they're being smeared with these fraudulent psychology labels, being called schizo, being called delusional and crazy. And these people can't prove any of this stuff. They're just name-calling without any facts. So yeah, when you see somebody who's calling someone names, you can realize that person doesn't have an actual argument, and they're wrong. So yeah, guys, psychology is not a science. It's being used to attack political dissidents who are known as, well, actually, this is like a modern term, I guess, targeted individuals. That's the new term for political dissidents that are targeted by COINTELPRO, by the government. Yeah, this is the new term, targeted individuals. And they're smearing all so-called targeted individuals who are really just political dissidents. They're smearing them all as mentally ill or delusional or schizophrenic. So our governments in the West, they are practicing communist tactics to a T. I mean, to an exact T. The exact stuff they did in the Soviet Union, they're doing here in Canada and the United States and Australia and the United Kingdom and all of Europe. This communist stuff in the West is really rearing its ugly head. Anyway, guys, thanks for watching the video. That's it. I'll see you in the next one. Peace out.